To było polsko-amerykańskie spojrzenie na europejską rzeczywistość, europejską politykę. Teraz spojrzenie amerykańskie i na Polskę, na zagrożoną polską demokrację. Mówię o tym amerykańska senator Shaheen. Ale z panią senator rozmawiał Marcin Wrona, który jednak głównie pytał o ostatnią rozmowę Biden-Putin.
Madam Senator, let me start with this. Are we today in a safer world after the Biden-Putin summit than before it? Has anything changed?
Well, I don't think we know that yet. But I do think it's important that the president and Vladimir Putin are talking. Throughout the Cold War, we always talked to the Soviets, and I think the idea that we're not going to continue to discuss issues that are important both to Russia and to the United States is very important.
How real is the threat of a hot war between Ukraine and Russia?
I think it's very real, and that was the reason for the summit between the president and Putin. What we know is that Russia is amassing over 100,000 troops on the border with Ukraine. We know what happened in 2014 when they went in and seized Crimea and then put troops into the Donbass. They denied that, but we know in fact that they did that. So I think there's great reason to be concerned, and obviously the Ukrainians are very concerned. We're going to meet later today with a number of members of parliament from Ukraine, a number of senators, to talk to them about their concerns.
What's Putin's plan?
Well, if you can figure that out, you're doing better than the rest of us. I don't know. What he said is that the fall of the Soviet Union was one of the biggest tragedies of the last century. It's clear that he's trying to put back together many of the countries that were part of the Soviet Union. Poland, obviously, was one of those countries. And so I know that that's a grave concern for Eastern Europe, for the countries in Eastern Europe. We've heard from some of your Polish officials about their concerns. So I think this is a time when it's very important for Europe and the United States to be aligned and be unified in our message to Russia.
It looks like Putin wants to build an empire, build the big Russia, this
Yes.
Legendary big Russia.
That certainly is what it appears.
Is it real at all?
Well, that's not clear, and that's why it's very important for us to be unified in our response, to let Vladimir Putin know that that's not acceptable, that going into a sovereign nation, violating those borders, violates the post-World War II order that Europe and Russia and the United States seem to have bought into. I say Russia is the only one who seems to have bought into that. Obviously, Europe and the United States have. So it's very important that we make it clear to Vladimir Putin that this won't be tolerated.
How should the United States and the rest of NATO fortify the eastern flank of NATO?
Well, I think that's part of what's under consideration right now. Obviously, NATO has rotational units that are throughout Eastern Europe and the Baltics, and those will continue. There has been an interest on the part of many of the Eastern European nations, including Poland, in increasing American troops on the ground. In fact, I was actually in Poland in 2015 when American troops went back into Poland for the first time since World War II, and I remember how excited the Polish people and how welcoming they were for American troops.
Madam Senator, I heard very clearly what you said during the recent hearing at the Foreign Relations Committee when you were talking about Poland. You said that you are very disappointed with what's going on in Poland. So what is the most disappointing factor for you?
Well, Poland has been a very strong ally of the United States. They've been a very good member of NATO. They have fought alongside of us in Afghanistan. And what I was disappointed at was what's happening with the media in Poland. One of the things that's very important in a strong democracy is a free media, so that independent reporters can report independently on the news, that they're not constrained by the government or anyone else about what is reported, and to have the government of Poland threatening to discontinue the license for TVN24, which has been one of the most watched independent news medias in Poland, was very disappointing. It's disappointing because it sends a signal that media and reporters can't be free in covering what's happening in the country. It also sends a signal about whether business and business investment outside of Poland should feel safe investing in the country. Because if there is a concern that your investment is going to be shut down or taken over by the government, then businesses are not likely to invest.
And it seems like it is an ongoing challenge, right?
It sounds like even though it's been resolved in the short term, there is still a real question about to what extent the government is going to allow independent news coverage to continue.
Madam Senator, you also mentioned the importance of shared values. And it looks like those values are sometimes completely forgotten or lost in the discussion. What is, for you, the core of those values?
Well, it is a recognition of the importance of democracy, of rights of individuals and human rights for all people. It is a free media, and so that people get information. It is the right to have opportunities in the future, and all of that, I think, is in question once autocratic leadership begins to take over.
You also said during the hearing that you hope that the future ambassador, Mr. Mark Brzezinski, will have direct, open conversations with the government of Poland. Do you see this dialogue happening?
Well, I hope so. Obviously, he cares a great deal about Poland. He has a history there. His family has a history there. And so hopefully that will have some influence in terms of the ability to talk openly and frankly with officials. You know, that's one of the things that's positive about having a strong relationship with allies like Poland, is that you ought to be able to talk frankly. And so I would expect Ambassador Brzezinski to be able to do that.
The Summit of Democracy is here. What is the state of democracy in the world?
I think democracy is in danger. And that's one of the reasons for the summit, one of the reasons to recognize countries that are aspiring to democracy. It's one of the reasons why what's happening in Ukraine with Russia is so concerning, because Ukraine is a country that has been aspiring to look to Europe, to the West, to, while it has a lot of work to do, it is developing its democratic institutions in a way that's really important. And we need to support those efforts and try and prevent dictators like Vladimir Putin from being able to go in and take over sovereign countries.
And we also have Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus.
Absolutely. And we know what Lukashenko has done in Belarus to crack down on people who oppose him. And, you know, I think Poland has an admirable record in terms of being willing to take in opposition figures from Belarus and provide asylum to them. Again, that's why it was so disappointing to see what was happening with media in Poland, and also to see the migrants being weaponized on the Polish border.
Madam Senator, the last question. President Biden is sounding an alarm because he says that the authoritarian tendencies are rising. How real a threat are those tendencies, and will democracy survive, prevail?
Well, that's why we need to point out when that's happening, when authoritarian tendencies are coming to the fore, why we need to take action, why we need to support aspiring democracies. But this is a dangerous time in the world, and to the extent that there's the potential for conflicts like Russia and Ukraine, it makes it even more dangerous.
Thank you so very much.
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Senator.
Thank you.